Good morning, everybody. It's BDF44. So I want to talk about sports. Surprisingly, um, just got to watching. What's his name? Colin Coward. Colin Coward, and he had Chris Broussard on. And they were talking about um, Patrick Mahomes kind of leaving some money on the table with his 10-year deal, so that the team could get better. And when you're dealing with salary caps, certain things have to be considered, and sometimes you may have to leave money on the table in order to make sure your team is competitive. And I just want to talk about that. Um, it's something that I've been following a lot in basketball. Football, I'm not as familiar with how it works, but just in general, the pressure for players, particularly all pro, all stars, superstars, guys that have responsibilities to lead teams, sometimes it is on them to make very well sure that the organization that they play for is good enough to compete. It's the GM's job to make sure the players are on the team, but he can only bring the players to the table. He ain't going to be able to fit them into the cap necessarily. The owner can pay, but the cap is going to keep the owner from having, the leeway to just acquire whoever he wants. Like in baseball, you can be the Yankees and just give everybody $300 million to just keep the best team. But that's not how it works in football and basketball. And really, the way the system's set up, it's meant for the players to kind of be responsible for ultimately taking only a portion of the pie that they need, and then from there leaving the rest for some better talent. Or you'll have a top-heavy team with no bench, or you'll have a situation where you can't afford to have any injuries. And I think we need to take a look at whether or not that works going forward. I like a salary cap. I understand it has to do with how much money is being brought in, revenue. It has to be divvied out responsibly. You just can't toss money all the way around, put yourself in debt. You know what I mean? Getting these 10-year contracts, $500 million for a superstar. He breaks his leg, you still got to pay him that money. So it's one of those things where it's like the salary cap it works and it makes sense, certainly, but sometimes it just leaves players at a disadvantage where they have to leave money on the table that they otherwise probably shouldn't have to. I think about players like Kevin Garnett, who spent maybe 11 or more years in Minnesota, and the team didn't make the greatest decisions in putting together a team around him. But he was paid so handsomely every time it was time for him to get paid that it just seemed like he was happy. And, looking back on it as a young man myself, as a kid, basically during Kevin Garnett's career, I used to think, man, if he could just get himself out of Minnesota, he could win championships. It's the best defensive big man in the game at the time, like easily the best defensive big man in the game at the time. He rebounded the ball well. He could hit a mid-range jumper. He fit in any system, is what I'm trying to say. So it's like his best years were spent on bad teams, but he was paid though. Now, luckily enough, he was able to salvage enough of his prime to where he could get to Boston and ultimately beat my Lakers, getting a championship. But I think he would have had so much more if he could find himself on the Lakers, for example, because I know he mentioned that he wanted to be a Laker, play with Kobe. That was something that he really wished he was able to do. If he could have did that after his first contract, him and Kobe would have had 5 championships together, like, easily. So it's one of those situations for me where it's just like, I look at a guy like Carmelo Anthony. Carmelo Anthony always took the money. Anytime somebody threw a big contract in his face, he took the most money he could get. And he found himself in bad situations. And it exposed his weaknesses on the basketball court. And it made him unhappy with how his career panned out. The trade that he ultimately landed him in New York, because of the way the salary cap was set up and because of the way just rosters have to be set up, they had to gut the entire team, the Knicks did, in order to acquire him. They gave the Nuggets their whole starting 5 and a bunch of picks. just to acquire one guy. And then that one guy turns around and takes all the money possible for him to receive as a star. And the rest of the team is garbage. And not only that, but it's the Knicks. So you don't really trust the organization to put the team around you to begin with. So it's like, yeah, Melo got paid. Melo's rich. Melo's going to always be rich. But how much more money would he have made if he would have been a champion on a contender every year in and year out? Endorsements alone could have made up for anything that he didn't get in his contractual negotiations. And that's the back end that works for a superstar that may not work for players who are, of normal status or less than. So it's like, I won't speak to those guys' position because they have less flexibility and less responsibility. But as it pertains to superstars, you guys, for me, in my mind, the way I look at it is, know your worth, know your circumstance, make sure you're with an organization that you trust, that has made good decisions, that understand the cap, and as the cap changes, can adapt to the changes of the cap responsibly. See, these are things that you want to look for in an organization. A lot of times I think guys are looking for the most money, they're looking for opportunities to play in the best cities, but sometimes those best cities don't have the best circumstances. Sometimes you look down the road at how the team is projected, and you see maybe they're good for another 2 years, and after that they're going to have to rebuild. And you're signing a 4-year deal with them, so guess what? Your last 2 years may be playing on a bad team. You don't want to play on a bad team when you're trying to pay for a lot of money. You know what I mean? When your contract's up, you don't want to be on a bad team that year, in a contractual year. So it's one of those things where it's like, I've watched how certain players have maneuvered, particularly in the NBA, not so much the NFL. And I say to myself, dude, if you would have just did this and this differently, your entire career path changes. And the best two examples are Kevin Garnett for me and Carmelo Anthony. So I look today at what's ahead for certain players. I look at a guy like Bradley Beal. He's in a situation like that. Even though I believe his last contract was a 2-year deal, he continues to take the money from Washington, and Washington continues to be not so good of a franchise. You know, they've made some bad decisions, they've had some bad breaks, and they're kind of just middle of the pack team. And he's a 30-point scorer but can't make an all-star team. Why? Because his team's not very good. Then I look at a guy like John Wall, his running mate. John Wall did the best thing he could possibly do. He earned status as a franchise player, cashed all the way out, and now he's been hurt for the last 3 years. But he's rich as hell. So you can see the flip side. It worked out for a guy like John Wall. Flip side to that. That's why things aren't working out for Bradley Beal, because he's stuck with a hurt player eating up most of the cap. He's eating up the rest of the cap, and the rest of the team is made up of guys that they've either acquired in trade, young players, or guys that they just drafted with, middle of the pack draft picks or worse. You can't win that way. So for a guy like Bradley Beal, I'd be trying to get out of Washington immediately if I'm him. As soon as my contract is over, I'm not taking all the money that Washington's going to pay me, even though they have my bird rights and can give me the most money, because the career path doesn't look very good. John Wall's still on the books. Who is he coming back as? Is he going to still be the same John Wall? It's been 3 years since we've seen this guy. Several serious injuries. So it's like, nah, I don't. They still owe him, what, $40 million over the next several years, each year? Come on, no. No, that's a bad situation for a guy like Bradley Beal. And I look at who else. Who else is on the docket? Giannis, the Greek Freak. You 100% want Giannis to be in a big city if you're the NBA. But Giannis' situation is unique because he's in a city that always drafted him, that always had him. He was drafted there. He's in a circumstance where the team has gotten gradually better every year since he's been drafted. He has gotten better every year, so they've done a fantastic job in helping him develop himself into the player that he's become. And they've shown signs of being able to make decisions both on the court and within their coaching staff that makes sense. that puts you on a path to continue to get better from here. So I'm not looking at Giannis the same way I looked at KG, because Giannis' circumstances are better. He's in an organization that handles their cap well, that continues to put teams around him that make sense, continue to put him in positions to have good coaching. There's no reason to leave. You see what I mean? It's not about where you live necessarily. It's just about whether or not the organization that you're with is one that you can win with. Now, Giannis is going to take all the money in the world, so we're not going to talk about whether or not he should leave money on the table. He's one of the top 3 players in all of basketball, so I don't think that really applies to him per se. He is just expected to eat up half of the cap no matter what team he's on, so that's almost irrelevant. Same thing with a guy like Anthony Davis. But the question is, how many years do they sign on for? A guy like Anthony Davis is on the team with LeBron James. LeBron James is 40-something years old, almost. He's my age, so he's 36. Yeah, do you believe LeBron could play for another 4 years at a high level? I do. So maybe you bank on that, maybe you don't. That's up to you. But it'd be smart for him not to sign a 10-year deal with the Lakers. Be very wise. Why? Because over the last 10 years, the Lakers have shown that they've barely been able to put the team together. Luckily enough, LeBron graced us with his presence, and Anthony Davis we were able to acquire and trade with a bunch of draft picks that we got for being a very bad franchise. So, do you trust the Lakers to make good decisions? Probably not. They have to continue to prove that they can. They've done a great job these last 2 years, but that's just 2 years. They have to show that they can continue to do it in order to get me to sign a 7-year, 10-year, 5-year deal with you. If I'm Anthony Davis, I'm signing a 1-1 or a 2-1, which will give you about 2 years to show me that you're competent enough, and we can revisit this conversation later. Maybe get you a championship. That's what I would do if I'm him. That way it leaves me flexibility to not only receive an out if things go south over time, but it also gives the team flexibility to renegotiate my contract to structure it so that the team can continue to grow as players come and go around me. So it's all about making sure that the player, in this case Anthony Davis, trusts the franchise, trusts how the trajectory of the team, trusts where he's at in his career at this age, and is making the best decision ultimately for the cap. Because if he makes the wrong decision for the cap and takes a 7-year deal at supermax money, he's going to be playing with the worst players that the Lakers are going to be able to put together, because they just won't have the money to get quality talent. So it's really difficult. Like, look at the Rockets. When the Rockets initially made the trade for Chris Paul, and they brought Chris Paul's contract to James Harden's contract, and they already had Clint Capella. At that point, they were capped out, and they could literally not make their team any better unless they found unsung heroes in the G League or just had players overachieve at very, very low prices. That was the trajectory of the team. They were banking literally on 3 players. And I said it when they did it. They have to trade one of these guys. They have to trade one. Like, there's no hope. Why? Because they don't have enough. But they have too much as it pertains to the cap. It's that simple. Some stuff is just easy to see. And when the Rockets traded Chris Paul to the Thunder, I was not surprised. Why? Because that contract was never good for them to begin with. Based on the way the players played together, based on the fact that they eat up too much of the cap, based on the fact they couldn't get a lot better because of the cap, because of those contracts. So, like, certain things you can just see coming. The cap won't lie to you. And what I mean by that is, you sign a $100 million guy and he's a superstar, but he can't shoot threes. You sign another $100 million guy and he's a big man, can't shoot threes. Then you sign another $100 million guy and maybe he can shoot a little bit, but he's not a shooter. Guess what your team is not going to be made up of? Shooters. You're not going to have many of them. You can get low budget shooters, one hit wonders, so to speak, or one trick ponies is what I'm trying to say. They're not going to help you like you need to be helped. Not when it's time for you to run into the juggernauts of the league. You're going to be out. You got some rich players. They're talented too. They're not going anywhere because you couldn't build up a proper team. You look at Boston, complete opposite. They have talent that they appreciate. They got max players, and they got draft picks that they've accumulated over the years. Some of which haven't even come from them being bad. They just made good deals and acquired those picks. Their future looks great. If I'm a free agent with a whole lot of money owed to me, and I don't like my current situation, I'm taking a look at Boston because they got the money to pay me, and it looks like their trajectory is going to be fine. They got a good front office that knows how to manage the cap and acquire picks. Good situation. I go back to the Thunder, same thing. Even though the Thunder don't have the most talented team right now, if you look at what they have in their back pocket over the next several years, plenty of picks that they've acquired over the last 3 years that are going to be valuable in them being able to acquire talent via trading those picks, or they can keep those picks and acquire talent that way. Very, very flexible going forward. Chris Paul will come off the books and they'll have an entire max contract to hand to somebody like Zion or Luka or somebody who will be a free agent around that time. Devin Booker, another guy that I should be talking about in this conversation. But the Thunder is a good place to go right now if you're a free agent and you're young, because you can look down the line, see that they have the money to pay you, and you can also look down the line and see that they have the opportunity to acquire more talent. So it's just that kind of thing, man. Then you look at those good situations and you say, do you trust that the front office is going to be able to stay intact so that this good fortune can continue? And I know that it's hard to say. You don't know, but those type of things are things that I'm sure a free agent and a free agent's representatives are thinking about when they're choosing their destination. So, that's why it's so important, I think, for guys to have people in their corner that are specialists on these things. It's important for guys, franchises to have guys in their front offices that are good with the cap and understanding these type of things as well. Because they are the difference between having teams that are good every year and having teams that are just okay or bad every year. That's what it's about. And what ends up going wrong also, unfortunately, is sometimes because of how the draft system is set up, future superstars end up in bad situations. You get these bad franchises, they suck, but they get gifted the best young talent, which I think is a flawed system that I've just, appreciated that it's worked out for my team. We've been fine, but for the most part, I don't really love that idea. If a front office shows me that they're incompetent, they can't get their heads out of their backside, why should we be gifting them the greatest of talent coming out of college or out of high school? Why should those who are bad with everything get the best of anything until they prove otherwise? I just feel like that's a flawed system. I understand that you don't want to continue to give teams that are already winning the best players. That doesn't really work either. But I just feel like the first pick in the draft, the second pick in the draft shouldn't necessarily go to the worst teams. Because those guys, they get into these situations and their careers start off a certain way. We know that when you get drafted to a team, chances are you're probably spending your first 7 years there. 7 years, 4 years to develop, and then a contract that you sign, your first big contract. You're probably going to stay there. So if I get drafted to the Knicks, who I know is a bad franchise, if I'm RJ Barrett, I don't like how my career is starting off. I may like the fact that I'm in a big city specifically, but pretend New York isn't a big city and just focus on the fact that the team is as it is. The first 7 years of my team, my career, I've stuck on a team like the Knicks with a front office like that. That's not fair. Why is he there? You know what I mean? Because they sucked that much to where we're just gifting them talent? What? That's never really made sense. I know it's a system that works, but I think we got to tweak it. I think the NBA should tweak that. I really do. Maybe you look at teams' overall front office performance over the last 3 years. Maybe you look at their books and you say, you know what? No, we're disqualifying them from the first pick in the draft. The highest pick they can get is third. Maybe something like that needs to be And I really think they need to evaluate each and every front office every 2-3 years, just to assure that the people in place are managing caps responsibly, because they do have these people's careers in their hands, man. We can't just act like this is just happenstance. You're paying these players millions of dollars to perform, and they're coming to you with their elite talent to display. We can't be giving them these horrible situations and keeping them stuck there for 7 years or more, just because you want to balance out parity for the league. That doesn't really make sense to me. It doesn't. I think structure within professional sports needs to be put a microscope on, so that we don't have incompetent trades going forward. There should never be a situation like the Lakers situation where they didn't get Anthony Davis at the time. They were failing to make that trade, so they made a last-minute trade that was very bad, giving Zubac to the Clippers in exchange for Mike Muscala, who's not a very good player, to be honest. That was a bad decision that was made in an incompetent mindset. And it showed. Guys were just tired making decisions. No, that is not how it's done. And the NBA should have come down on the Lakers and made sure that trade never went through. Like, in my opinion, that should have never happened. You're giving away a 22-year-old center with defensive upside and shoots free throws at like a 90% clip at the time for a guy that's a free agent and he's a back of the bench player, and you're attaching Michael Beasley's contract to that to make it work. Like, that was a horrible trade. It was one of the worst trades of all time, in my opinion, even though it was a lesser players involved. In terms of value versus what you're getting back, it was literally the worst trade I'd ever seen. Just really, it's the worst one I've ever seen. And that's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Like, if I'm Anthony Davis and I know they made that trade just 2 years ago, why the hell am I giving them the next 4 or 5 years of my career? They have to prove to me that they're not capable of making a decision like that for me to entrust them with the next 5 years of my prime. It's not going to do that. So that's what I have to say, man. Just overall, I want to see the NBA in particular, because that's the league that I follow, just kind of hold themselves to a higher standard structurally, so that players aren't forced to leave money on the table in order to assure that their teams don't suck, or players don't have to stress themselves out wanting out of a city that they're drafted to, but probably are going to end up having to stay there just to make sure that their families are straight, to make sure they get the money first. Nah, I don't like it. I don't like the whole structure. I need to fix that. Anyway, my name is BDF44. Thanks for listening and watching me, and it's good to talk about something other than social justice stuff. It really is. I want to get my mind off of that for just a second, but I do ask that you guys continue to pay attention to what's going on out there, and just be as knowledgeable as you can and responsible with your voices. My name is BDF44, and I'm out.